Outlaw Law is brought to you by Whitaker and Hamer, attorneys and counselors at law. Your law firm for life.
The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm. Offices located Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay, Varina, Gastonia, and Morehead City. Joining us from the Morehead City office is Cassandra Nichols, also an attorney at Whitaker and Hamer. I'm Morgan Patrick, consumer advocate. We get into the legalese each and every week. If you're facing a situation and you need questions answered, you can always contact Whitaker and Hamer by calling 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call's about. An attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch, and you can always email your questions to the show, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com. We'll answer those on a future program. Next up, Josh.
You know, the last session of the U.S. Supreme Court, we had a lot of, how would you, Cassandra, how would you describe the last session of the U.S. Supreme Court? I was going to say it was controversial, maybe that's the right word.
Eventful, at least.
Eventful, that's right. And again, we never really delve into politics, and we never really delve into conservative versus liberal. We just like to talk about what the court did and the legal things behind it. And so during the last session, there were a couple of big cases that were decided. We talked a lot about Roe v. Wade being, I guess, fundamentally overturned and kind of left to the states. And that was I think that was a big shock to the system. It was a shock to the folks who cover. I think even we.
I don't think we predicted that.
I don't think we did either. I think we predicted maybe some limitations or something like that. But so anyway, so that's something the world, the U.S. we got this decision where abortion was no longer a constitutionally protected right according to the Supreme Court. So that means it went back to the states, right? And a lot of these states had laws on the books where they would go ahead and ban abortion if this ever happened. And so, of course, that's been a big talking point, especially going through the midterm elections. And a lot of people have looked at that case and looked at how the Supreme Court, abortion was kind of protected, and we've talked about it before, was kind of protected under this this right to privacy that's kind of over the years been read into the Constitution by some of the Supreme Court decisions. But this constitutional right to privacy, and so abortion now being not constitutional no longer has that protection. I think there's been a concern on what else could that affect, right?
Yes, that was a good summary. That was really good.
And one of those items that's kind of just recently been protected, right, is same-sex marriage, right? So you may be personally against that. You may be personally for that. That's a big issue on both sides. Right now, that has the protection, according to the Supreme Court. That's a constitutional protection, but it's based on the same theories that the protection extended to abortion was based on, right? So the theory being, if abortion can be found to not be constitutional, what is this next, right? Is the Supreme Court going to look at this same-sex marriage? Again, the Supreme Court, I think in the abortion decision when Roe v. Wade got overturned, they explicitly said they don't intend to do that. But still, if that is something that you support, that's a big concern. And so the federal government, Congress acted, and they created what they called a Respect for Marriage Act. And this actually came together pretty quick, Cassandra. I don't know how closely you've been following it.
Well, the vote came together quickly, but the Respect for Marriage Act was first introduced in 2009 and never came to a formal vote. So it's been around for a while. Before the Obergefell decision in 2015, protecting the right to same-sex marriage under the privacy right. The other thing I do want to mention is Loving versus Virginia. That's a 1967 case in front of the Supreme Court that the decision protects the right to interracial marriage under the same reasoning, the right to privacy.
Right.
So that was also a concern at front of mind for a lot of people. So that right to, or Respect for Marriage Act that's had a version around for 13 years finally did come together really quickly for a vote through the House in July and then finally through the Senate now in November.
Yeah, so that's they got, as they say, they got a lot of bipartisan support, and they got on the book. So the way I was listening to a legal commentator talk about it, but the way I understand it is the way that act would operate is, if the Supreme Court was ever to say reverse course, go against precedent, and say, hey, interracial same-sex marriage is no longer constitutionally protected, it goes back to the states, and the state could still make it illegal. But the federal law means they'd have to respect, full faith, honor, credit any same-sex marriage from another state.
So you can't invalidate other states
Right.
rulings, essentially. Yeah.
So that got, and I think that's not a bad thing, right? I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court, made a decision that kind of made everybody look at, what can they do, what's in their realm to protect, and what's really left up to the courts. And so here, the Congress really, took that notion and ran with it and said, well, here's what we can do. Here's what we can protect. And man, they never, both sides never really worked together on anything. And I really do feel like this came together.
And it wiped out a long-standing act, the Defense of Marriage Act, which basically defined marriage as between a man and a woman. So that's essentially replaced. And I think, that's probably something that had a lot of bipartisan support at the time. I think it just shows kind of an evolution in general of views. Because even you look at President Biden, who really touted the success of this and how quickly it was done. And he's somebody that originally voted for the Defense of Marriage Act back.
And Clinton signed that into law in 1996. So
exactly. And I think it just shows the changing of, it's just an evolving of just general societal views across the board, really, and some people may disagree with it being whether that's a positive or a negative thing for anybody individually. You can't dispute the consensus, I believe, which is evidenced by the fact that you've got bipartisan support from politicians on both sides voting for this has really shifted in, I want to say not a long time, but I mean, 96 that's a pretty long time ago now, man.
It
feels like yesterday.
96 was a good year, man.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think anytime anything gets bipartisan support and passes, like I don't even care what it is. It's just like a good, warm, Christmassy feeling that we had bipartisan support to put anything through. Everything's so contentious, but
not just that. Like codifying anything is a good idea, an important thing. Like that's how Congress is supposed to be functioning. That a lot of these interpretations, these nuances, should, in theory, be going through Congress. It shouldn't just be left open-ended. Exactly. Forcing the court to make decisions that can then be reversed as well. So this formalizes things.
Yeah, and that's a good point. A lot of this stuff shouldn't necessarily, it goes to the Supreme Court because there's a lack of direction, right? That's how you end up at the Supreme Court, because you've got a novel or very important issue that needs their intervention, and some of these things really should be legislated, right? We shouldn't.
You want your individual legislature, the person that you have voted into power, right? Like in theory, you voted this person into power because you trust them, and as opposed to just a court of individuals that you don't have that much say so over who they are. In theory,
I feel like so many of the court decisions kind of shade Congress too. They say like, this should be legislated. This should be codified. But as long as we're stuck with it, here's the decision.
That's what I feel like when I'm picking up after my kids. Like, I shouldn't have to be doing this.
The Outlaw Lawyers, Josh Whitaker and Joe Hamer, managing partners at Whitaker and Hamer Law Firm, practicing attorneys here in the great state of North Carolina. Also joining us from the Morehead City office, Cassandra Nichols on the program today. And we've talked about a lot of subjects. Got one more to go. Want to remind you, too, offices are conveniently located for Whitaker and Hamer in Raleigh, Garner, Clayton, Goldsboro, Fuquay, Varina, Gastonia, and, of course, Morehead City. If you've got a legal situation you're facing, you've got questions, you need some answers, you can always call the firm, 800-659-1186. That's 800-659-1186. Leave your contact information, briefly what the call is about, and an attorney with Whitaker and Hamer will be in touch. And you can always email your questions to the show, questions@theoutlawlawyer.com, and we'll answer those on a future program. When we come back, well, we're going to talk about some estate planning and, of course, the firm, Whitaker and Hamer. That's all next on The Outlaw Lawyers.